Hi AP, today we're going to review our part writing root position triads worksheet number 1. If you look carefully at the first line, the directions say fill in the inner voice or voices in the second chord of each pair. The key is C major throughout. So it looks as if we have the same chord, we just need to revoice it and restructure it. So let's look at the first measure. There's only one way to do this because they brought the soprano down to a G4. So everything will be in close spacing. There's our fifth, there's our third, and the root is doubled. Make sure your stems are appropriate. In the second measure, the soprano has gone up to a high D, that's doubling the root already. Now we need the third and the fifth. Let's retain the same note F in the altos for smooth voice leading. And the tenors can jump down to a perfect fourth and sing the fifth. Fourths are fine. In the third measure, we have an F major triad. And we have the root in the bass, the third in the soprano. We need the fifth, which is a C, and another root. So what I would do is double the root with the tenor and have the altos stay on the C for smooth voice leading. In the next measure, we have a C major triad, but notice that the bass leaps up an octave, and that's allowed. So it doesn't give us much wiggle room here. So we have the basses singing the C, the tenors can sing the E, the altos can sing the fifth, the G, and then the sopranos are doubling the root. In the last measure, we have what appears to be an A minor triad. The soprano has gone down to a C, doesn't leave us much wiggle room because the bass is singing a high A there. So what we'll do is retain the common tone right there in the same voice, the A, for the altos, and the tenors can jump up to sing the E, or the fifth of this triad. Now what you want to do is go back and make sure that you have a doubled root in every case, because these are all triads or chords in root position. And then what you want to do is make sure that you do not have anything like parallel fifths or parallel octaves. And if you are, whenever possible, retaining the same common tone from one chord to the next, then it allows for smooth voice leading. And it looks as if I don't have any issues with parallel fifths or parallel octaves, and all of my doubling is correct. Moving on to the second section, which requires a little bit more thought because you'll have to think of the principles that we've been learning. The directions say add alto and tenor parts to each of the following exercises. Each progression involves roots a perfect fifth or perfect fourth apart. So think of principle number 1. And there are 3 examples. The first measure is in D minor. We have a minor 1 going to a minor 4. The second example is a 2-measure progression in A major. We have the 6, 2, 5, 1, Roman numeral analysis. And the last measure is the key of B flat major with a 2, 5, 1, 4. So where do we begin? Well, let's look at the first measure and realize that the bass motion is that of a fourth, going from a D to a G, which means there will be one common tone. Keep the common tone in the same voice. Determine that the common tone is a D. The tenors are singing a D. Keep the tenors on a D in the 4 chord. Analyze your pitches in that chord. So far we have a G, B flat, D. What's missing? The doubled root. So the altos will go to the nearest chord tone from the F up to a G. And that's how you would voice that. And there are no errors, no parallel fifths, no perfect octaves, things like that. In the next measure, key of A major, we start out with the 6th chord, going to the 2 chord. This motion right here is that of a fifth. That means there will be one common tone. What's the common tone that exists in the 6th chord and the 2 chord in the key of A major? Hopefully you said F sharp. Keep the F sharp in the alto. Make it a quarter note, since that is our rhythm. Analyze your chords so far. You have a B, F sharp, B. So the root is doubled. You have the 5th. You need the missing 3rd. Tenors will sing the missing 3rd, which is a D. That's acceptable for the tenors. This leap of a 4th is fine. Now you're going from the 2 chord to the 5 chord. The bass motion is that of a 4th, which means there will be one common tone. And notice that the common tone is already provided for you in the soprano voice. So what you want to do then is move the other voices to the nearest chord tone. So tenors would go from a D up to an E, and when they do so, the root is doubled. Analyze the chord so far. E, E, B. We need a G sharp that's missing, and it makes most sense for the altos to just go up stepwise and sing the G sharp. No need to put accidentals because you have a key signature. And let's resolve that 5 chord. In the next measure, from 5 chord to the 1 chord, the bass motion is that of a 5th. So there will be one common tone. So here you already have the doubled root of an A. The sopranos on that whole note are singing the A, so we can't write a note above that. We could, if we wanted to, double the soprano A and have the altos sing it, because here, remember, is T, and T resolves to Do because it's a tendency tone. But remember that rule, it's in an inner voice. So what we can do is move T down to Sol because it's an inner voice. And there's the 5th of that 1 chord. And then the only thing that's missing is the 3rd, which the tenors could sing right there, the C sharp. So I have the root doubled, and I have 1/3 and 1/5 in that 1 chord. Now there is one more way to do this progression in A major. The one that we've done is in close spacing, but there is a way to do it in open spacing, and I'll show that to you right now. So I'm going to erase this. And what we could do is this. This is not recommended because you don't retain the common tone in the same voice, but it does work. So if you had this, it would also be acceptable. And you see how that's open spacing because I can fit one chord tone in between the upper 3 voices. Let's move on to the B flat major. Starting out with a 2 chord going to a 5 chord. That's a root bass motion of that of a 4th, which means there'll be one common tone. Keep the common tone in the same voice. Hopefully you figured out the common tone between the 2 chord and the 5 chord is the C in the key of B flat major. Stems up for tenors, and move the other chord tone in the alto to the nearest chord tone that's missing, which would be an F. Now you have a 5 chord to a 1 chord. That's bass motion of a 5th, which means you'll have one common tone. Keep the common tone in the same voice. It's the F right here that the altos are singing. And then have the tenors sing the other missing chord tone. The nearest chord tone to complete the triad is a D. Now you have the 1 chord to the 4 chord. The bass motion is that of a 4th, which means there will be one common tone, according to our principle. But if you look here carefully, the common tone, which happens to be a B, is not retained in the soprano because the soprano notes that they provided is a B down to a G, which means you're not going to have the common tone in the same voice. So we could have the tenors singing the B, and we'll have to have the altos singing the E. You're a bit limited there because the sopranos are singing a low note. And that's how you would work that one out. Now go back, double check that you have the root doubled in every case. And between every adjacent voice part, make sure that you do not have parallel fifths or parallel octaves. Also make sure that it does not exceed an octave between the upper 3 adjacent voices. Make sure there's no voice crossing or voice overlapping. Make sure that your stems are all the correct direction, up for soprano and tenor, down for alto and bass. And we're looking good. Let's move on to the key of E minor. It looks as if we're using harmonic minor because you see the raised 7th scale degree in the sopranos. They're singing a D sharp. Notice that there's no reason or need to put the sharp sign in the Roman numeral analysis because a capital Roman numeral 5 indicates that the triad will be major or the chord will be major. So the bass motion from that 5 chord to the 1 chord is that of a fifth, which means there'll be one common tone. The common tone that exists in the 5 chord and the 1 chord in the key of E minor is the B, which should be retained in the tenor voice, which I'll add now. Stems up. And the chord tone that's missing is going to be a G, and the altos will sing that. It's stepwise upward to the nearest chord tone, and you'll put your stem down for alto. Now we have the 1 chord going to the 4 chord. The bass is moving by that of a fourth, which means there will be one common tone that exists between both chords. The common tone is an E, which is already here in the soprano. I've just circled. And to simply move all other chord tones to the nearest chord tone to complete the chord. Make sure that you use half notes because our harmonic rhythm has changed from quarter notes to half notes on the last chord here. And the tenors will move up and sing the C. Let's resolve this. We have to go from the 4 chord to the 1 chord. Notice that the bass moves by that motion of a fourth, which means there will be one common tone. The common tone is kept in the soprano, as I've just circled, which is the E. So what you want to do is move all other chord tones to the nearest chord tone to resolve this chord. So altos would go down a step and sing the G, and tenors would go down a step and sing the B. Keep it on whole notes. For the next chord progression, we just have one measure in the key of F major, 1 chord to the 4 chord, back to the 1 chord to the 5 chord. The 1 chord to the 4 chord moves bass motion by that of a fifth, which means there will be one common tone. The common tone is F. Keep it in the alto. And the tenors will sing the nearest chord tone, which would be the B flat. Now we're going from this 4 chord to the 1 chord. The bass motion is by that of a fifth, which means there will be one common tone. Keep the common tone in the same voice, in which case alto on the F, and tenor will move to the nearest chord tone and sing the C. Stop for a moment, go back and check to make sure that you have a doubled root in all of these chords. Stop for a moment, double check that you have 1/3 and 1/5. Stop for a moment, double check that you are not exceeding an octave between the upper 3 adjacent voices. And supply the last chord. We're going from the 1 chord to the 5 chord. The bass motion is by that of a fourth, which means there will be one common tone. What is the common tone? From the 1 chord to the 5 chord in the key of F. Hopefully you said C. If you look carefully, it's not retained in the same voice because you have a C in the bass and a C in the soprano, so it's already doubled, which means you'll have to write very carefully here so you don't avoid a part writing error. So we need the 3rd and we need the 5th. So we need an E and a G. Well, the altos can go up to the G, And then the sopranos or the tenors would need to sing the E, like so. There's no voice crossing, so that's still allowed, and that's in closed spacing or closed structure. Now, if you wanted to, I suppose you could have, I'll put it in parentheses, you could have the tenors sing that C if you had the altos sing that E. That would also be fine. It would not be breaking any rules or laws, and if you did it that way, it would be an open structure. Let's move on to the key of G major. We have a 2-measure harmonic progression. The 1 chord to the 5 chord, there'll be one common tone. The common tone that exists is that of a D. It should be retained in the alto voice. And supply the missing chord tone with the tenors up to an A. Look at that smooth voice leading that they have there. Very nice indeed. Now you're going from the 5 chord to the 1 chord. The bass motion is by that of a 5th. There will be one common tone. The common tone is D. It will remain in the altos. Sorry, altos, you have a boring part here. Supply the missing chord tone, which happens to be the 3rd. And the tenors will slide right up for smooth voice leading and sing the 3rd of that chord, which is the B. Now we have the 1 chord to the 4 chord. The bass motion moves by that of a 4th, which means there'll be one common tone. The common tone would be G, but it's not retained in the soprano because look at the soprano. It's singing a G, and then it's going down to an E. So you have to write very carefully for this last chord. We need one more C, and we need the G. Well, the altos can't sing the G and go above the soprano, so the altos will need to sing the C. I've just doubled the root, which means the tenors need to sing the 5th. And that's fine for the tenors to go down a 3rd. That's how you would voice that. And then you're going from the 4 chord to the 1 chord. The bass motion is by that of a 4th, which means there'll be one common tone. But the common tone again will not be retained in the soprano. So you would have the altos sing the D, and you would have the tenors sing the B. And this is acceptable because you're allowed to have more than an octave between the bass and the tenor, just not the upper 3 voices. And that's how you would write that example. Let's move on to the last section of root position triads worksheet number 1. We're in the key of B flat major. Take a look at your bass notes and your bass motion. Here we have the 6 chord going to the 4 chord. That tells me right away that the bass motion moves by that of a 3rd. Recall the principle that when you have a bass motion that moves by that of a 3rd, that you'll have not one, but 2 common tones. So keep the common tones in the same voice. So let's spell the 6 chord in the key of B flat major. That's G, B flat, D. Let's double the root with the alto, our only option. The 6 chord and the 4 chord share 2 common tones, a B flat and a G. The common tone is already retained in the soprano that's given for us. Retain the common tone in the alto. Then move the tenor in contrary motion to that of the bass, to the nearest chord tone. So tenors will be singing the E flat there and doubling the root. Now you have a 4 chord to a 2 chord right here. The bass motion moves by that of a 3rd, which means you will again have 2 common tones that should be retained in the same voice. Easy enough. Keep the altos on the G and keep the tenors on the E flat. The 2 chord in the key of B flat major is C, E flat, G. So notice I have 2 C's, so I've doubled the root. Now you have the 2 chord to the 5 chord. The bass motion is by that of a 4th, which means now, recall that principle, you'll have 1 common tone because the bass motion is by that of a 4th. What is the common tone? It's given to you in the soprano. Now you just need to move all other voice parts to the nearest chord tone. So altos can go up to sing the A, and tenors can go up to double the root and sing the F. That makes the most sense for smooth voice leading. Let's look at the next harmonic progression, 2 measures in the key of G major. We have a 1 chord going to a 3 chord. When you have a 1 chord going to a 3 chord, your bass motion moves by that of a third, which means you'll have 2 common tones that need to be retained in the same voice. One of them is done for you, the B in the soprano. The other common tone is the D, which is in the tenor. So let's leave it there. What's the missing chord tone? Looks like an F sharp. It should go in contrary motion to that of the bass. So down in the alto right there. I've doubled the root, which is a B. Now we have the 3 chord going to the 6 chord. This moves by that of a fourth, which means you'll have 1 common tone. The common tone will not be retained in the same voice, because if you look carefully, the common tone is a B, and the sopranos are singing B down to a G, which means I've got to rework my voice leading here. Let me double the root and add the 5th. That's the smoothest voice leading. Now I have a 6 chord and I want to go to a 2 chord. The bass motion moves by that of a 5th, which means there'll be 1 common tone that exists between both chords. Find the common tone, determine that it's an E. Keep the E in the alto voice. I need to double my root. That's what's missing. I have a root in the bass, I have the 3rd in the soprano, and I have the 5th in the alto. So let me put the A here in the tenor, and I've just doubled the root. Now I have a 2 chord going to a 5 chord. That means that the bass root motion is by that of a fourth, which means there should be 1 common tone retained in the same voice, but it's not going to be retained in the same voice based on how the soprano notes are written. So what I would do is put the tenors on the F sharp and put the altos on the D, like so. Why wouldn't I want to do this and put the F sharp there and put the D here? Well, it's simply a matter of voice leading and making sure that you have the smallest intervals possible when singing these notes. Put yourself in the mindset of a singer. It's easier to sing a 3rd than it is a 4th. So I'll just erase that. Now I have the 5 chord and I have this dash. All that dash means is that the 5 chord continues on to the next chord. But I want to change it up a little bit and rework it so it's not static. And I can't keep it static if I wanted to because the soprano is moving up to a higher note. So I've doubled the root already. Let me put in the 3rd and the altos, and the tenors can sing the A. Now I've got to go from the 5 chord to the 1 chord. The bass motion moves by that of a fourth, which means there'll be 1 common tone, but the common tone will not exist in the same voice because of the way the soprano melody is written. I want to make sure to use half notes here. Let's double the root with the tenors. And I've got the 3rds sung by the soprano, and I can add the 5th here for the alto. Remember, in my 5 chord here, which I'm circling, your solfege is sol, ti, re. So where is T? Well, T is the F sharp. The altos are singing the F sharp. Normally they would resolve to do because T is a leading tone or a tendency tone and has the tendency to resolve upwards towards tonic. But since it's in the alto voice, I can actually go from T down to sol, no problem. That enables me to double the root with the tenors. The last one, the key of F sharp minor. We have a 1 chord going to a 6 chord. The bass motion moves by that of a 3rd, which means there'll be 2 common tones that should be retained in the same voice. Find out the common tones, F sharp and A, and keep them in the inner voices. Now I have a 6 chord going to a 4 chord. The bass motion is by that of a third, which means there should be 2 common tones in the same voice. The soprano has 1 common tone. The other common tone is the F sharp in the alto. What to do next? Find the missing chord tone and move it in contrary motion to that of the bass. So the bass is going down. The tenor is going to want to go up to the nearest chord tone that's missing, which is the B. And now we're going from the 4 chord to the 1 chord. The bass motion is by that of a fifth, which means there will be 1 common tone. What's the common tone from the 6 chord, from the 4 chord to the 1 chord? F sharp. Keep it in the alto, and supply the missing chord tone in the tenor voice. Now go back through all of these examples, double check that you have no parallel fifths or parallel octaves between any adjacent voices. Make sure that your upper 3 voices do not exceed an octave. Make sure that you have the correct note doubled in every case, that is the root, since these are root position triads. And that's all for now. I hope this helped. See you later, AP.